The morning started like any other, groggy and routine. Emma's alarm buzzed sharply at 6:30 a.m., a sound she had grown to loathe. She rolled out of bed, rubbing the sleep from her eyes as she shuffled toward the kitchen, her slippers whispering against the hardwood floor. The air was crisp, colder than usual for mid-March, and she made a mental note to check the thermostat after her coffee. Her 6-year-old son, Danny, was still asleep upstairs, his small frame curled beneath a mountain of blankets. The quiet house was a comforting reprieve, a sanctuary before the chaos of the school run began. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Emma opened the fridge, scanning for the cream. But when she turned back to the counter, her hand froze mid-motion. There, beside her steaming mug, was a folded piece of paper. Emma frowned, her brow creasing. She didn't remember leaving it there. The paper was unremarkable, plain white, folded neatly in half. It wasn't the kind of thing she usually kept around. Puzzled, she picked it up and unfolded it carefully, as if it might shatter in her hands. The handwriting stopped her breath. It was hers, not similar, not close. It was an exact match, down to the loops in her E's and the subtle slant she always made in her T's. But the words, "Check the pantry before you leave. Don't forget." Her first thought was that she had written it the night before and simply forgotten. But as she searched her memory, there was nothing. No flash of pen against paper, no lingering sense of urgency about the pantry. She felt the tiny hairs on the back of her neck rise. The house was unusually silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed muted. Emma shook herself, laughing under her breath. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered. Still, her eyes darted to the pantry door, closed and unassuming. With a sigh, she crossed the kitchen and pulled the door open. Inside, the shelves were neat and orderly, stocked with cans of soup, boxes of pasta, and snacks for Danny's lunches. Nothing seemed out of place. Except, in the far corner of the bottom shelf, a small tin sat slightly ajar. Emma knelt, reaching for it. She didn't recognize the tin at first, an old cookie container, its edges rusted and worn. She opened it and found an old photograph inside, its black and white image faded, but still sharp enough to make out a figure. It was her. At least it looked like her. The woman in the photo had her face, her build. She was wearing a dress Emma didn't own, standing in front of a house she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened. The sound of tiny feet thudding down the stairs broke the spell, and she quickly stuffed the photo back into the tin, closing it with shaking hands. "Mom," Danny's voice was groggy. "What's for breakfast?" "Coming, sweetheart," Emma called, slipping the tin back onto the shelf. She shut the pantry door firmly and tried to shake off the unease that lingered like a shadow. That night, Emma sat on the couch with her laptop, trying to unwind after a long day of work and errands. Danny was upstairs in bed, his soft snores drifting faintly through the ceiling. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt heavy this time. Her mind kept circling back to the note and the photo in the pantry. She had spent the day trying to rationalize it. Maybe she had left the note herself in a moment of forgetfulness. The photo was harder to explain, but she told herself it was likely some relative she didn't know about. Emma closed her laptop with a sigh and rubbed her temples. The tension in her head was building, the kind that no amount of chamomile tea could cure. Deciding to call it a night, she moved through the house, turning off lights and checking locks. As she passed the kitchen, her eyes flicked to the counter where the note had been that morning, and stopped. There was another note. Her breath hitched as she approached it, her steps tentative. The paper was the same, the handwriting identical. She unfolded it with trembling fingers, her heart pounding. "Did you find it? There's more." Emma's stomach churned. The words sent a chill crawling up her spine. She spun around, scanning the room. The kitchen was still, bathed in the soft glow of the stovetop light. The notes couldn't be hers. They weren't hers. Someone had to be leaving them. But how? She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed her best friend, Claire. The line rang twice before a groggy voice answered. "Emma, it's late. What's going on?" "I think someone's been in my house," Emma whispered, glancing over her shoulder toward the darkened hallway. "What? Are you okay? Did you call the police?" "No, it's complicated." Emma explained the notes, her voice trembling as she recounted the events. Claire was quiet for a moment before saying, "Do you have a camera system? Anything you can check?" Emma exhaled shakily. "No, just locks, but they're all secure." "I checked. Maybe it's Danny," Claire suggested gently. "Kids get creative." Emma glanced toward the stairs. "Maybe," she said, though she didn't believe it. After hanging up, she hesitated, then opened the pantry again. The cookie tin was still there. She reached for it and flipped it open. The photo was gone. Her breath caught, and she stared at the empty tin, her mind racing. From behind her, she thought she heard the faintest sound, the soft scrape of something brushing against the floor. She turned quickly, but the room was empty. For the first time, she didn't feel safe in her own home. By the third day, Emma could barely think straight. Her mind raced, trying to untangle the web of unease that had taken root in her life. Each corner of the house felt imbued with something, watchful, aware. The air seemed heavier, colder, as though the walls were silently absorbing her every move. It didn't help that the notes kept appearing. This time there was one taped to the bathroom mirror. She noticed it as she shuffled in to brush her teeth, still groggy from a restless night. The note was short, the handwriting precise. "You've been asking the wrong questions." Emma's heart thudded painfully as she stared at her reflection, half expecting it to blink without her. Her pale face looked gaunt, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. She had spent the past 2 nights lying awake, listening to the faint creaks of the house, flinching at every sound. She turned away from the mirror and clutched the sink, the note crumpling in her fist. "Stop it," she whispered aloud, her voice trembling. "This isn't real. It can't be." But then she heard it. Scratch. Scratch. The sound was faint, but unmistakable, coming from somewhere within the walls. Her breath caught as she straightened, her ears straining to pinpoint the source. The scratching was soft, rhythmic, as though something, or someone, was tracing patterns behind the drywall. "Danny," she called out, forcing herself to sound calm. No response. She rushed to his room, her pulse pounding in her ears. Danny was still asleep, his small form curled tightly under the blankets. The sight of him brought her a fleeting moment of relief, but the scratching continued. Emma turned, following the noise down the hallway. It grew louder, more insistent, until she found herself standing in front of the pantry. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the door handle. A chill ran down her spine. Slowly, she pulled the door open. Inside, the shelves were undisturbed. The cookie tin was still there, untouched. But the sound persisted, coming from deeper within the wall. Emma knelt, pressing her ear against the cold surface. Scratch. Scratch. Her heart thundered as she ran her fingers over the wall. The paint felt rougher here, as though something had scratched through the surface. She pressed harder, and the walls seemed to groan beneath her touch. "Mom!" Emma spun around to see Danny standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Why are you up?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "I heard noises," he said, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "What are you doing?" Emma forced a smile. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just an old house making old house sounds. Let's get you back to bed." But even as she tucked Danny in and kissed his forehead, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching her. The next day, Emma decided she needed answers. After dropping Danny off at school, she returned home and went straight to the attic. The idea had come to her the night before, a persistent whisper in the back of her mind. There are answers here if you're willing to look. The attic was a place she had avoided since moving in. It was cluttered with forgotten boxes and smelled of mothballs and dust, but today it felt different. The air was thick, humming faintly with an energy she couldn't explain. Emma climbed the creaky ladder, her flashlight sweeping over the shadows. Cobwebs hung like ghosts in the corners, and the wooden floor groaned under her weight. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that she would know when she found it. It didn't take long. Tucked into a corner, half hidden beneath an old quilt, was a wooden box. Its surface was smooth but weathered, etched with faint patterns that looked almost deliberate. Emma hesitated, her fingers brushing against the lid. Do it. The thought was so clear, it felt external. Gritting her teeth, she opened the box. Inside were journals. There were at least a dozen of them, their leather covers cracked with age. Emma picked one up and flipped through its pages. Her breath caught. The handwriting was hers. Every page, every sentence, was written in her unmistakable scrawl. But the entries weren't familiar. She read the first few lines. March 3rd. I hear them again tonight. They're whispers in the walls. They know I'm here. They're waiting. Her hands shook as she turned the pages, each entry more frantic than the last. March 7th. They leave notes to guide me. But where are they leading? To the truth or a trap? March 10th. I saw it in the mirror today. It was my face, but it wasn't me. Emma slammed the journal shut, her chest heaving. She opened another, then another, and each told the same story. A woman unraveling under the weight of a reality she couldn't explain. The final journal was different. Its pages were blank, save for a single line scrawled across the first page. You already know what you've forgotten. The attic felt darker now, as if the shadows had deepened. Emma's flashlight flickered, casting jagged shapes across the walls. The scratching began again, louder than before, coming from directly beneath her feet. Emma grabbed the journals and fled, her heart racing as she descended the ladder. The house seemed to shift around her, its walls groaning softly as if alive. Back in the kitchen, she slammed the journals onto the counter and gripped its edge, trying to steady herself. A note was waiting for her, placed neatly beside the stack of books. It was new. Keep going. The words written in her own hand felt like a command. Emma sat at the kitchen table, the journals spread before her like artifacts from a life she couldn't remember. Her hands trembled as she flipped through their pages, the words feeling both familiar and alien. They painted a portrait of a woman unraveling, her days consumed by whispers, notes, and fleeting shadows. The scratching from the walls had stopped, replaced by an unsettling stillness that pressed against her like a physical weight. The house felt alive, breathing, waiting. Her eyes drifted to the latest note. Its words, "Keep going," seemed to pulse on the paper, urging her forward. But forward to what? Emma closed her eyes and exhaled, trying to quiet her racing mind. And then she felt it, an inexplicable pull, not unlike the one that had led her to the attic. It tugged at her, a silent invitation from the heart of the house, the basement. Her body moved almost against her will, each step deliberate, as though the house itself were guiding her. She paused at the top of the basement stairs, the door slightly ajar. The air beyond was thick and cold, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. "Danny," she whispered aloud, the name grounding her. "For Danny." With a deep breath, Emma descended. The basement was darker than she remembered, the single overhead bulb casting a feeble glow that left the corners in shadow. The pull was stronger now, directing her to an old bookshelf pushed against the far wall. It wasn't until she stood in front of it that she noticed the faint scratch marks trailing along the floor, as though it had been moved recently. She hesitated, then pressed her hands against the edge of the shelf and pushed. The bookshelf groaned in protest, revealing a small, dark alcove behind it. Inside was a single object, a mirror. Emma froze, her pulse roaring in her ears. The mirror's surface was framed by tarnished silver, its glass smooth and untouched by dust. It seemed out of place, pristine in an otherwise neglected space. As she stepped closer, her reflection rippled like water, distorting unnaturally. And then it stilled, showing not one Emma, but two. The second figure was her, identical in every way, but subtly wrong. Its eyes were darker, its expression colder, and its movements didn't align with hers. "What is this?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Her reflection tilted its head, as if considering her. And then it spoke. "You remember now," it said, though its lips didn't move. The voice wasn't hers. It was layered, echoing with a depth that sent chills racing down her spine. "I don't," Emma began, but the words faltered as memories surfaced like fragments of a shattered mirror. This house, these journals, these notes. She had been here before, lived this before, and she had forgotten, because she'd chosen to forget. "I don't understand," Emma said, stepping back, her breath hitching as the mirror grew brighter. "You do," the reflection countered, its tone unyielding. "You wrote the notes, you left the warnings, you built this story." Emma's legs threatened to give way beneath her. "Why? Why would I?" "To save yourself." The reflection stepped closer to the glass, its face pressing against the surface. Emma felt an icy chill radiate from it, and the air around her thickened. "You tried to escape," it continued, "but the truth doesn't disappear. It waits. It always waits." The glass shimmered, and suddenly the reflection wasn't alone. Behind it, faint outlines appeared, figures of people she didn't recognize, their forms blurry and shifting like smoke. "They tried too," the voice said, softer now. "You're the only one who's come this far." The figures moved closer to the glass, their ghostly eyes locked on Emma. Their presence felt like a warning, a reminder of what she had been running from. "What am I supposed to do?" Emma asked, her voice cracking. Her reflection smiled, an unsettling, knowing curve of its lips. "Finish what you started." The light from the mirror flared, illuminating the alcove in blinding brilliance. Emma shielded her eyes, the sound of whispers filling her ears, rising to a crescendo. And then silence. When she opened her eyes, the mirror was gone. The alcove was empty, the space where the glass had been now bare and lifeless. But something had changed. The house no longer felt oppressive. The air was lighter, the stillness less menacing. Emma turned and ascended the stairs, her steps steady for the first time in days. The notes, the scratching, the whispers, they had served their purpose. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but the weight of the house's secrets no longer pressed against her. As she tucked Danny in that night, the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. The final note lay tucked in her pocket, a quiet promise written in her own hand. "You're free, for now,